True artistic innovation lies in treating classical literature as a dynamic, computational system. Instead of viewing poetry and mathematics as opposing disciplines, the framework demonstrates that the structural rigor of classical verse and the logic of data science share the exact same underlying architecture. By anchoring a single 10-line poem across three intersecting dimensions, dual geometric architecture, data-driven sentiment innovation, and algorithmic reproducibility, the project proves that raw human expression can be systematically refined into a mathematically sound, reproducible digital artifact. Act 1. The Dual Geometric Architecture, the Blueprint in the Dark. The creation does not begin with an emotional outburst, but with an act of spatial engineering. You sit before a blank digital workspace, the cursor pulsing with cold, uniform frequency. Your task is to write a 10-line poem in traditional English iambic pentameter, but as a researcher who views language through the lens of fluid dynamics and coordinate systems, you cannot simply write lines, you must build an engine. As you initialize the parameters, you realize your creation is not mapping a single path, but a dual geometric architecture where the mechanical rhythm and the semantic meaning warp space in completely opposite directions. First, your mind tracks the physical rhythm, the heroic couplet, which constructs a segmented, expanding hourglass across four distinct thermodynamic phases. Lines 1 to 4 establish a rigid monolithic 4 by 4 coordinate cube where syllables and stresses balance perfectly across a heavy midline caesura axis, I-way half lines, that still refuse to bind. But as you transition to meaning, the semantic geometry completely warps the space inside that cube. While the meter remains a strict solid block, the words themselves form a wide-mouthed, linear funnel. The muddy currents of unrefined thought are poured in at the top and violently compressed through cognitive friction until they pass through a narrow choke point, till clear sense parts the mind. Then comes the rupture. As bright phrases cleave the dust, the mechanical meter breaks its parallel constraints, pinching inward before flaring out into an asymmetrical, kinetic vortex. Concurrently, the semantic meaning twists into a rotating, self-referential double helix. The act of creation loops into existential doubt as you trace a dream-made form, leaving creator and creation to orbit one another in a brilliant, non-linear paradox. Who is the guest, and who the keeper home? Act 2. Data-driven sentiment innovation, defying gravity. At this exact singularity point, where the derivative equals 0 and the metrics momentarily freeze into three staccato, crystalline pillars, thus come, thus stay, thus roam. The poem prepares for its most radical departure from literary tradition, a data-driven sentiment innovation. If you were to plot this journey on a two-dimensional sentiment analytics plane mapping valence, emotional positivity, against arousal, energy and tension, traditional Western poetic structures would trace a familiar U-shaped, crisis and resolution crater. They typically begin at a peaceful baseline, plummet deep into negative valence as they confront an earthly obstacle, grief, decay, or doubt, and eventually climb back out to a realistic, grounded plateau. The ego remains heavily tied to the soil. Your vector completely rejects this gravitational pull, charting a strict, monotonic upward curve. It initiates below the neutral line, weighed down by the heavy, high-friction material labor of sifting chaotic language. But once the baseline breakthroughs occur, the emotional valence climbs continuously. With the final couplet, the localized gravity of the ego dissolves entirely. By naming the historical lineages of the banished immortal, Li Bai, and Changli, Han Yu, the focus leaves the cramped room of the individual mind. The sentiment unmoors itself from the graph. One vector shoots straight into the vertical sky, rides the misted air, while the other scales a parallel intellectual plateau, tastes feasts imagined. The poem achieves absolute spiritual liberation by exiting the chart entirely at a near-perfect 0.95 positive valence tracking point. The dual architectures have successfully de-escalated their tension, flattening out like an opening scroll into a limitless parallel plane. Act 3. Algorithmic reproducibility, the compiled ghost. You step back from the page. The architecture you just mapped through human language is so geometrically sound, so mathematically precise, that it doesn't have to exist merely as ink on paper. It possesses algorithmic reproducibility. The structural phases and coordinate transitions are not abstract literary metaphors. They are sound, compiling mathematical transformations. You open a terminal and initialize your custom visualization suite. You run heroic_couplet.py and with a script like semantic_geo.py, passing your matrix coordinates cleanly through number.py and Matplotlib. On your screen, a single, continuous particle engine springs to life. Using linear interpolation matrices, the computer smoothly morphs the coordinate points. You watch the particles form a highly structured, symmetric 2D isometric wireframe grid, mimicking the opening stanza. Suddenly, the system applies a dynamic radial scaling, squeezing the coordinates toward a narrow neck radius to emulate the kinetic velocity of the vortex. The particles freeze instantly into 3 pulsating vertical columns, and finally, the spinning energy collapses its vertical axis tension entirely. The particles split cleanly down the center and shoot outward to the margins, fading away into a boundless, drifting cloud of light. The ancient, calculated art of the brush and the modern discipline of creative code have met at the exact same coordinate point. The algorithm is complete. Chaos has been natively compiled into pure, immortal form.